Welcome back to Practical AutoCAD and Inventor. In this video, we're going to look at creating the primitive three-dimensional shapes in AutoCAD. Before we begin looking at the primitive shapes in AutoCAD, let's first look at the 3D modeling environment. Down in the bottom right-hand corner of the status bar, you'll see a little gear down here. And this gear is your workplace switcher. So if I click on this, you'll notice that I am able to go from the 2D drafting and annotation environment to the 3D modeling environment. And this is the one that I use when I create 3D models in AutoCAD. And you'll see that as soon as you change from that 2D drafting and annotation environment to the 3D modeling environment, all of your tools on the ribbon change. The Home tab now has different tools, and then we have Solid, Surface, Mesh, Visualize, all of these. And most of these are for three-dimensional tools, and they're not necessarily available to you through the two-dimensional ribbon. So looking at this now, there are actually 7 different primitives that most shapes are made of. And most of the time you can take and add or subtract these different shapes one from another to come up with complicated shapes, and we'll look at that in a following video. But the 7 primitive shapes that you have in AutoCAD are the box or prism, cylinder, cone, sphere, pyramid, wedge, and torus. Now, a couple things to note. Anytime you're using any of these, it wants to begin drawing on the XY plane. You'll notice in AutoCAD that once I've changed from that 2D drafting and annotation environment to my 3D modeling environment, and I've changed my view type, my view style from 2D wireframe to something like conceptual, that my UCS icon, my user coordinate system icon, changes. The Y value, if you zoom up or if you look at that, the Y axis is yellow and it goes this direction, the X axis is red, and the Z axis is blue. And of course that is also mimicked on your crosshairs as well. You can see all 3 of them. As you rotate this thing around, you can see that they will definitely change positions. And I'm just orbiting by holding the Shift key and using the pan on my mouse to get that to turn around. But the important thing to note is when I create these primitives, it's going to create them on the XY plane first and then the Z plane second. So if I want to change that, we'll look at, in another video, we'll look at changing the UCS, the user coordinate system, so that it's a little bit more flexible and it adapts to what we need to do. First of all, let's look at the box command. The box is going to start off by basically drawing a rectangle and then elevating that rectangle. So if you look on the command line down here, you'll see it says specify the first corner, just like it would with a rectangle. So you can either pick with your mouse or you can type in a coordinate. So for example, I could say let's start at 5, 5, and it picks that point, and now it's allowing me to draw a rectangular base for this. There are a couple of options down there like cube and length, but if you know the size of the rectangle that you want, you can use absolute, relative, or polar coordinates. So I could say something like at 4, 1.5, so it makes a rectangle that is 4 inches long and 1.5 inches on the y-axis, and then it's allowing me to make my height whatever I want that to be. So you'll see the height now. I can pick with my mouse, or I can I can type in a value. I could say +1 is going to make it go up 1. If I say -1, it's going to make it go below that work plane 1 inch. Or you could even just pick a point with your mouse. So I'll say let's give it a height of, say, like 4 units. I'll press enter. And so now I've got this rectangular prism or a box that is 4 by 1.5 by 4 tall. So remember, it always wants to start on that XY plane. And so if I come in here and I make another one, I say box, I pick my first point, it's always going to start on that XY plane, and then it's always going to either elevate or go below that XY plane on the second one. All right, so that's the box command. The second one on the list here is the cylinder. And it's just the same type of idea. It's going to start off by drawing a circle, and then you're going to elevate that circle. So again, notice it says on the command line down here, it says specify the center point, and I have the same options that I have in the circle command: 3-point, 2-point, tangent, tangent, radius, okay, and so on. So I can pick my center point, I can specify the radius, maybe I want this to have a radius of 1.5, and then I can specify the height of my cylinder. So I could say, 2 3/4, and it makes a cylinder that is 2 3/4 inches tall. So now notice that I've got those two primitives there. The next primitive is the cone. It starts off just like the cylinder did. It's going to ask me for the center point of my circle. In this case, I'm just going to come over here and I'll pick the center point, and then it gives me the diameter option. So to just change it up a little bit, I'll say I want the D for diameter option. I can specify that I want it maybe to have a diameter of 1 3/4, and then I can tell it what height I want it to be. Let's make it have a height of 5 units. So it builds my cone in there. Next up, we have a pyramid. Now the default pyramid has 4 sides, but before you can tell it that you want the sides, you have to first of all either specify the center point or I take that back. You either have to tell it where you want the center is, or if you want to change the number of sides, you're going to choose the sides option down here on the command line. I'll leave it at 4, and then we'll make another one with like 6 in a moment. I'll pick the center point, and then it's kind of like circumscribing a rectangle. I can pick any point I want, so I could say like at 2 at an angle of 90 degrees, and then it's going to allow me to elevate that, so I can make it, let's go up 4.5 units tall. So now I've got my pyramid there with 4 sides. But if I wanted to have a pyramid with some other number of sides, I could definitely do that using that command again. Again, the first option that I want to do is specify the number of sides. So I could say let's make it have 6 sides, and pardon me, start over again. S for sides, and then I want 6 sides. Then it asks me for the base or for the edge. If I type E for edge, then I can draw one edge. You see how it's allowing me to draw one edge? I can give it whatever orientation I want. How about if I say at 1 at an angle of 0? Remember, 0 is along that x-axis, and then I can put in my height here, and I'll say, how about 2.5? So there is my 6-sided pyramid. The next one here is the wedge. And the wedge is basically just like drawing a box. So it's going to start off by picking one point with my box, and then the second point with my box, and then it's going to elevate on the y-axis on the first point that I picked. Okay, so again, if I do this again, I say wedge, and I'll say wedge. When I pick my first point, so the first point was that corner there, my second point, it's going to elevate on the y-axis on the first point I picked. If I do it again, and I pick them in other order, if I pick here and then I pick there, it's going to elevate on the side that's closest to me on the y-axis. Okay, and it doesn't matter which way I go. If I go, start here and then go this way, it's still elevating on that y-axis. So by default, it wants to elevate this edge because it's aligned with the y-axis, and then it wants to elevate the first point that I picked, not the second point. But from there, I can also come in and I could do relative coordinates, polar coordinates, whatever it happens to be. If I need this facing the other direction, once you get it built the way you want, you can simply come in here and say, I want to rotate using the regular AutoCAD rotate tool and say, let's go -90 degrees, and now it's rotated the way that I might need it to be. The last two are the sphere and the torus. The thing about the sphere is it's just like drawing a circle. Okay, it's going to give me the 2-point, 3-point, or tangent radius option, but notice that it just does it all at once, and as I draw it here, I don't know if you can tell, but half of it is below the actual plane that I'm working on, and half of it is above the plane that I'm working on. And then the torus itself is kind of like a donut. It's going to ask you for the center, the edge, and then you can make your donut have whatever radius you want it to have. Again, half of that donut is below the XY plane, half of it is above the XY plane. By using all of these shapes together, you can use add and subtract, or union and subtract, or intersect, and come up with most of the shapes you're going to need to draw your objects, and that's the subject of the next video.